Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Brad Bowman. He's a senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I really appreciate the time today because there's certainly a lot to discuss. Over the weekend, President Trump announced that the United States and Israel launched a massive joint attack against Iran, resulting in the death of the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Since then, we have seen Iran launch retaliatory strikes of their own against countries all over the region, and President Trump suggested that this conflict could last 4 to 5 weeks, but it's moving substantially ahead of schedule. That's what he said. But I do want to talk about where exactly this conflict is coming. It's coming at a time after multiple rounds of negotiations between Iran and the United States to end Iran's nuclear program. And those conversations ended without any major breakthroughs or ended without any deal in sight. So to start off the conversation, what do you make of the moment we're in right now?
I think this is the most consequential moment in U.S. relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran since 1979. How's that for a bottom line up front? I saw the president's remarks talking about these exercise, this operation, as many of your viewers did, and it was my view for a while leading up to this that something was going to happen. And let me quickly explain what I meant by that. We saw the Iranian people rise up yet again in December, demanding that they have a government that respects them and is interested in their welfare rather than the export of terrorism. And President Trump encouraged the protesters to come out and protest more and threaten the Islamic Republic of Iran not to hurt them. And then what did Tehran do? Tehran essentially shrugged and proceeded to murder them by the thousands. Okay, tens of thousands. Some estimates are as high as 33,000. So in my world, and someone who kind of focuses on strategy, foreign policy, national security, it is not nothing when the President of the United States essentially issues a red line and then an adversary regime shrugs and says, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. Many of us criticized Obama and his red line, right? If this red line weren't backed up, it would make what Obama did look like kiddie play, if we're just being, nonpartisan, truthful here, which I try to be. So when that happened, I felt like certainly the president's personal and political interests were at stake. Of course, you might have felt humiliated for being blown off. That's a thing when you're talking about the most powerful man in the world. And there's also American national security credibility. Do the words of the president matter? Do American red lines and warnings matter? And that's not something that's just going to be hermetically sealed to the Middle East, right? Putin's watching, Xi's watching, Kim's watching. So that matters. That matters. That doesn't mean you justify anything that follows, but you understand that deterrence is based on perceptions and credibility. And when the president gets so clearly blown off, that's not nothing. So the president said he wanted a meaningful deal. He sent Witkoff and his son-in-law to go negotiate. I expressed repeated public concerns that I was afraid that the Iranians would bamboozle, that's an official technical term, bamboozle the American negotiators and dupe them like the Obama administration negotiators got duped into thinking a fundamentally bad deal was a good deal, and then they would take that back to Trump, and we, America, would once again agree to a disastrous deal. I said, and my colleagues have said, that a good deal had at a minimum the following elements: an end to its nuclear program, no enrichment, addressing its ballistic missile program, and an end to its support for terrorism, and stop murdering Iranians, right? But anyone who knows the Islamic Republic of Iran knows there's a snowball's chance in a hot place they were going to ever agree to that, because that would require them to be something that they're not. So thankfully, the American negotiators didn't get bamboozled. I'm so thankful for that. They realized the Iranians were never there negotiating in good faith. So when that happened, when that realization hit the negotiators and Trump, it was clear that military action was coming. The only question at that point was, what would be the scale of the military action? Would it be a messaging strike, just trying to save face for them blowing off Trump's red line? Or would it be something more? Well, as the headlines reveal, it's something more. This is the objectives here are incredibly ambitious, shall we say, and achieving them in the way that those objectives have been stated will take longer than many Americans realize and will be more costly. And we know that already 4 U.S. service members have paid for this operation with their lives.
What do you make of that scale exactly? Because I know when people were talking about the potential for military action A consensus was that we could see limited military strikes. This seems to be a little bit beyond that scope of limited, right? President Trump has used the term war when discussing the casualties. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has used the word war multiple times. Are we in war right now with Iran?
I think if you're sitting in the cockpit of an F-35 or an F-15 or an F-16 or F-22 and you're flying combat missions over Iran and they're trying to shoot you down and kill you, that probably feels like a war. I think if you're on the Ford Carrier strike group, on the Ford Carrier, and you departed Norfolk Naval Station in last summer, and then you deployed to the Mediterranean, and then you deployed to the North Sea for a NATO exercise, and then went back to the Mediterranean, and then went to the Caribbean, and then now you're in the Eastern Med fighting, shooting down missiles and conducting operations. I think that might feel like a war for you. So, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't even play one on TV, but I did work on Capitol Hill in the U.S. Senate for 9 years, supporting members of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees. I don't know, it's kind of at some point it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. Hello, this is a war. This is a war. And you'll notice when the president said it, he used the word imminent. I don't think that's probably a word that President Trump thought to say on his own. Probably his lawyers told him to say that, because saying the word imminent, that the threat from Iran was imminent, and we can talk about that if you want to, is an implicit way of saying that he's operating under appropriately, constitutionally, lawfully under his Article 2, Section 2 authorities. Notice I didn't mention Article 1, that would be Congress. And so that's where the questions of imminent threat come from. But don't let anyone hear me misunderstand, right? The Islamic Republic of Iran is the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism. They have refused to relinquish their progress toward a nuclear weapons capability. They're the leading source of terrorism. They're a member of the axis of aggressors. Good riddance to Khamenei. But let's also be straight. But I think it was a mistake not to bring in Congress more fully. One, respecting their constitutional Article 1 authorities. But as Winston Churchill suggested, starting a war is a bit like a ship setting out to sea. You don't know what waves and swells and winds and storms you're going to encounter. Anyone telling you that a war is going to last weeks, I'm sorry, the enemy has a vote. It might last longer, and Americans will die. And so when things start to go badly, you're going to want the American people in Congress to clearly understand the objectives, why those objectives are worthy of sacrifice, so that they're with you when the going gets tough, and the going is already getting tough, obviously, as anyone would have predicted.
To that point, Senator Mark Warner, he's the top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee. He's in the Gang of Eight. He expressed a similar statement to you that really good riddance to the Ayatollah. No one's missing him. The world and the regime is better off now that he's dead. But he said that he saw no evidence of Iran launching a preemptive strike against the U.S. And I want to talk about that word imminent. President Trump used imminent when he was describing Operation Epic Fury. CNN reported over the weekend as well that the Pentagon briefed congressional staff and said Iran wasn't going to strike U.S. forces unless Israel struck them first. So what do you make of imminent in general? Was Iran posing an imminent threat, do you think, to the United States?
I think Iran, despite what happened during the 12-day war, where I'd say an unambiguous message was sent about the national security interests of America and our allies, Israel, they refused to end their nuclear weapons program. Some elements of the nuclear program were not hit. I'm thinking of Pickaxe Mountain. Not a single munition was hit during the 12-day war on Pickaxe Mountain. At the negotiating table, to the Trump administration's credit, they repeatedly tried to get them to commit. They are determined. They were even reporting that we would give them a endless nuclear fuel supply. As long as they agreed to not enrich, they wouldn't even do that. So the problem here is not the Trump administration. The problem is the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism wanting the world's most dangerous weapon, a ideologically based refusal to do that, and support for terrorism. And let's not forget that this regime has the blood of hundreds and hundreds of Americans on their hands. That is not some hawkish talking point. It is a fact. Read my 2019-2020 article in The Hill, where we documented more than 600 American service members killed in Iraq by IEDs and explosively formed penetrators that were produced and smuggled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps into Iraq. Go back to 1983 Lebanon, go back to the hostages. This is a long list. Iran is our enemies. It is a good thing that Khamenei and his leadership is gone. If this regime falls and the Iranian people finally have a government that is worthy of them, that is excellent. and the cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China is growing, They're not, I'm not saying the Russian and Chinese military is going to come in and start fighting America to protect Iran, but China is sending, for example, both before and after the 12-day war, sodium perchlorate. I almost failed chemistry at West Point, but those are chemical precursors that you use for ballistic missiles. So a lot of the ballistic missiles being launched at American troops right now, at our Arab partners, Israelis, some of those probably have Chinese Communist Party chemicals in them. So the list goes on and on and on. But I am not, what Secretary Hegseth said, to answer your question directly this morning in the Pentagon press briefing, along with General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is that the Islamic Republic of Iran was building a conventional shield to protect their nuclear weapons program. That's exactly right. They were sprinting to reconstitute their air and missile defense. They're sprinting to reconstitute their ballistic missile production capacity and to build their ballistic missile arsenal. And let me just give you and your viewers a quick statistic. Let's remember the first direct attacks between Iran and Israel was in April 2024. Iran launched 120 ballistic missiles. And then October, how many did they launch? 200. And then the 12-day war in June of last year, how many? More than 500. Are we all seeing the trend? 120. 200, 500, and now we've surpassed that. I don't know the exact number as I sit here right now, but we've surpassed that 500 number from the 12-day war after 2 to 3 days, not 12 days. So that's a problem. So what the secretary is saying there is true, but that's not the same thing as imminent if you mean imminent like tomorrow or next week. So maybe they have classified intelligence about something that was imminent, but I have not seen that yet.
I want to talk about exactly how Iran is retaliating. They're striking the Gulf states, and President Trump reportedly told CNN that this is what's surprising him most in all of this conflict. What do you make of that? Why do you think Iran is attacking these countries?
I think it was a huge mistake for the Islamic Republic of Iran to lash out in the way that they did against Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Basically, almost every Arab country that we can think about in along the coast there, whether you're talking about Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, even Saudi Arabia, Qatar, has been attacked by the Islamic Republic of Iran. What a huge mistake for Tehran. Because one of the essential grand strategic plays of that radical regime since 1979 is to try to put forward the idea that the great problem in the region was Israel. And when you talk to leaders, Arab leaders among our Arab partners, they would say, hey, we know the threat is Iran. We know Israel's not the problem. But for our populations, we can't say that out loud. And so that was what's so beautiful about the Abraham Accords. It was a recognition by Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates that Israel's not our enemy. And it was an implicit, at least implicit recognition that Iran was. So they've known it true. They haven't always to be true that Iran is the number one threat. They haven't always been willing to say it publicly, but this underscores it, and it's infuriated a lot of our Arab partners. So what Tehran has done is they solidified the unity and determination of this American, Arab, and Israeli coalition, which is a good thing for regional security, a good thing for American interests, and a nightmare for what's left of the regime in Iran.
I want to get your take on if diplomacy is still even an option right now, because a day after President Trump announced that Operation Epic Fury was underway, he said that Iran wanted to talk. However, an Iranian official disputed that because the next day, the country's top national security official said that Iran will not negotiate with the United States. So is diplomacy dead right now?
I think one of the things I kind of warned about before this was that if that this time was not going to be like the 12-day war. Sometimes I think human beings, and maybe Americans in particular, we think that the next one will be like the last one. I was worried that this administration might have been hyped up on the incredible success of the Venezuela operation, and maybe at least subconsciously was thinking that everything was going to go that easy. Of course it won't, right? Venezuela is not Iran. And also subconsciously thinking this would be like the 12-day war, where what did we do during the 12-day war? We did, after the Israelis did a lot of the heavy lifting for 11 days, we had one really impressive mission with B-2 bombers escorted by F-22s and other things. That's not what we're talking about now. In the first 24 hours, we're talking about not 3 sites hit, over 1,000 sites hit. So it's really important for your viewers to understand that the scale of this is completely different. And another difference between what we're seeing now and the 12-day war is that there was kind of a diplomatic off-ramp so that we could get the win, not a complete and total knockout win, but a win while avoiding a longer war that it will be draining in terms of time and resources. I don't know what the off-ramp looks like at this point. If I'm being blunt, I don't know what that looks like. This regime clearly is viewing this as an existential fight, and both as an individual and a regime, in this case, a nefarious, horrible regime that's the world's leading state-sponsored terrorism. They think they're in a fight for survival. So I would predict they're going to use anything they have at their disposal and use it. And what do they have at their disposal? They have a global terror network. Okay, yes, their regional terrorist network is degraded. Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis are still there. They can do a lot. We have the militias in Iraq. We have we have some most Shias are awesome and amazing and wonderful, but you have some that buy into the Islamist Republic of Iran's sick ideology who might be willing to conduct lone wolf attacks. And so I am worried about both regional and global terrorism. So you have that. They still have a lot of missiles that they're firing and drones as well. So there's more difficult days to come. I do worry about that.
I think it's really important that you mentioned how big and different this scope is, right? I mean, in the first day alone, this Iran Supreme Leader was killed. President Trump said that the couple of candidates to replace him that the United States was thinking about, they were all killed too. Levels of leadership taken out here. But President Trump said the big wave hasn't even happened yet. The big one is coming soon. Any indication to you of what that exactly means?
In the briefing this morning, General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Staff, said additional forces were being deployed into the Middle East to support Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command. He didn't delineate what those are. Of course, we had the 3 F-15s shot down in a fratricide incident by Kuwaiti. Talk about fog of war. Thankfully, the pilots are okay, as I understand it. There might be some political rhetoric here on the part of the president trying to get what's left of the Iranian regime to come to the negotiating table, but I have no doubt that they're going to continue, if not escalate, the attacks. But what I'm telling you and your viewers is that they're already pretty robust. One quick thing I would highlight is that in President Trump's speech, right, he laid out some military objectives, some of which were very attainable, some which were, shall we say, were a little bit more ambitious. But then he said, hey, Iranian people, now's your chance. Maybe it's a once in a generation, or however you said, a chance, take over your government. Okay, but here's my concerns on that. This regime is decapitated. The Israelis' infiltration of the Iranian leadership, both civilian and military, is just extraordinary. The ability to simultaneously take out leaders is just breathtaking from an intelligence operational standpoint, just incredibly impressive, honestly, from a military perspective. But if let's be clear, there are still thousands, I'm reluctant to say tens of thousands, but that might be right, of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members with weapons, with a sick ideology, who are more than happy to murder as many Iranian civilians as possible. And what is the Iranian population? Incredibly impressive, incredibly educated, and not that well armed. Okay? And if you think that, oh, that's just theory, Brad. Well, okay. Look at the 33,000 or so murdered since December. So it's kind of not easy to sit in the safety and comfort of Washington and say, hey, rise up and take your government, when you're dealing with thousands of IRGC members with guns and a sick ideology. They're going to do anything to retain their horrible despotic grip on power. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the plan to support the Iranian people. I would be a huge mistake, in my opinion, huge mistake, to send, I mean, have we not learned anything from Iraq, right? To send American ground forces into Iran. But could we and should we be doing more to surge max support to the Iranian people so they can communicate with one another, so that they can organize and empower them to do it if they choose to do it? But I don't see a scenario, and I hope I'm wrong. I pray that I'm wrong. I don't see a scenario where thousands of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members are going to lay down their weapons and suddenly become advocates of a small L liberal democracy. I just don't see it. So we should all care about the Iranian people sincerely, and if you care about them, then we should think about what does that actually look like for them to actually try to take their government from this despotic, violent regime.
And my last question to you, based on what we've seen this weekend and over the past couple of days with just how big this conflict really has gotten, do you think that there could potentially be a World War III here based on what we're seeing now?
Yeah, the concern behind your question, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as I'm hearing is that, can't will this expand or escalate? And it already has, right? I mean, we have more than 8 or 9 countries being attacked by Iran. We've talked about the scale of U.S. strikes into Iran, which I hope decimate their ballistic missile production, their ballistic missiles, their nuclear program, their air and defense, and missile da 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 da. For this to escalate beyond that, what would you have to have? I think you'd have to have another major nation state come in on the side of Iran. And so who would that be? I've conducted a more than 20-month research study with colleagues here on the axis of aggressors: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So, the fall of this regime in Iran would be a wonderful thing from an American national security perspective, depending what replaces it. And we should bring some humility about our ability to predict or control what comes next. Have we not learned anything? We don't know. We don't know. But for it to escalate into like a World War III scenario, which I don't think is likely, I think you would need to see China or Russia come in and fight alongside Iran, and I think that they don't want that. They don't want any part of that. I think Putin's a little busy in Ukraine, continuing his unprovoked war of conquest and aggression there. And China thus far has been very happy to provide dual use support to all of the 3 members of the Axis, including the sodium perchlorate that I talked about earlier with the Iranian ballistic missiles. But for it to expand the way you're describing, I think one of those states would have to come in. I see no indication that they would. We see Erdogan in Turkey mourning the death of Khamenei. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And he's a NATO ally. We got a NATO ally mourning the death of Khamenei, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised, because Erdogan's also the one that after October 7th, the worst single day slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, he met with Hamas, celebrated Hamas, and had an official day of mourning when justice was brought to Ismail Haniyeh. So, that's who we have in Erdogan. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that he's mourning the death of Khamenei, but that just because he holds a sick Islamist ideology doesn't mean he's dumb enough to try to come into this conflict. So I don't predict that. So in short, I see accomplishing the American objectives in Iran taking longer than most people think. It pains me to say, as someone who served in the military and saw some people not come home from conflict, we're going to see more casualties. And this isn't a checkers game. This is life and death, war and peace. We should remember that. And I think we're going to see it's going to be more resource intensive than people realize. And we really better look at our defense spending and our industrial base, because after this is over, we're going to have to sprint to replenish our arsenal and our munitions and make sure that we have the power to deter aggression in the Baltics from Putin, or in the first island chain from Xi, or from Kim on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for, and this is a rapidly developing situation. So I appreciate your perspective here. And as we see more come out of it, I hope you can come back on and join me. Brad Bowman, I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks so much.
Thank you.